kids, welcome back to my channel. My name's Lizzie, and we're going to finish out the book, Nancy Drew Clue Crew, the Valentine's Day Secret. So are you ready? We're starting chapter 7 at 15 seconds. Alright, chapter 7, Pigtail. What else did Tanya do? Nancy asked. Did she stick something in my cow's pocket? George asked. Something that looked like a Valentine? Trina was starting to look bored. She kept glancing over at the costume corral. I don't know, Trina said. I was busy dressing my horse. Now, if I could just find a basketball uniform to dress him in, that would be so cool. Good luck, Trina, Nancy said, and thanks. See you at Bess's party later, Trina said. She walked towards the costume corral, dribbling her basketball all the way. Bess's party, George cried. Everyone's going to Bess's party except us. Forget that, George, Nancy said excitedly. Trina just gave us the best clue. So it was Tanya who put that creepy Valentine in my cow's pocket, George said. Let's tell Farmer Fran now. Not yet, George, Nancy said. We have to question Tanya first. Fine, George said. Then we tell Farmer Fran. The teenage helpers were in the middle of their song and dance show. Tanya was doing fancy cartwheels across the stage in her pig suit. What a ham, George chuckled. When the show was over, Nancy and George ran straight to Tanya. But before they could say anything, Tanya smiled at George. Hey, Tanya said, her braces flashing like lightning. How do you like that little surprise I stuck in your barnyard buddy the other day? George's mouth dropped wide open. So did Nancy's. You did do it, George cried. Sure, Tanya said. I thought you guys would never leave your table, but when you went to the Cocoa Cafe, I made my move. Nancy couldn't believe her ears. Not only was Tanya admitting to giving the creepy Valentine to George, she was bragging about it. Look, Tanya, George said. I said I was sorry for knocking down your pig pile. And I'm sorry I yelled at you the way I did, Tanya admitted. That's why I decided to give you a ticket. Ticket? George asked. What ticket? Nancy asked. A prize ticket, Tanya said, raising her eyebrow. Give yours to Farmer Fran so you can collect your prize. Tanya flashed another shimmering smile, then she turned to leave. I didn't get any prize ticket, Nancy, George insisted. I checked both my cow's pockets right after I found that creepy Valentine. Nancy shook her head back and forth. I don't think Tanya gave you that creepy Valentine, George, she said. You don't? George asked. Why not? Because Tanya couldn't have been chewing blue gum or any kind of gum, Nancy explains. Tanya wears braces. Nancy and George left the store and began walking down River Street. There's them doing the show. You only have one suspect left, Nancy said. Henderson, George said as she stopped walking. Right, Nancy said. No, I mean, there he is, George said. She pointed through the window of Pete's Pizza Paradise. Sitting alone in a booth next to the window was Henderson. Henderson was wearing a karate uniform and orange belt. He was making a mess trying to karate chop a cheesy slice of pizza. Come on, Nancy said. She waved her hand in the direction of the door. Henderson might be making a mess, but he's going to come clean. Once inside, the girls approached Henderson's booth. Henderson stuffed the last piece of pizza into his mouth. What's up? Henderson asked. First of all, you're not supposed to talk with food in your mouth, Nancy said. And second, we want to ask you a few questions. Henderson swallowed with a big gulp. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, The answer is yes. Yes, what? George asked. Yes, you can have my leftovers, Henderson replied. He stood, picked up his greasy paper plate and balled up wad of dirty napkins and shoved them into George's hands. Gee, thanks, George grumbled. Mr. Murphy, Henderson's dad, walked over from the cash register. Come on, big guy, he said. he called. You don't want to be late for karate. Hi-ya! Henderson cried. He karate chopped the air as he followed his dad out the door. Great, Nancy said. How are we going to know if Henderson's guilty now? George placed the tray on the table with a clunk. But as she lifted her hand, something sticky was webbed between her fingers. Yuck, George said. Henderson stuck his gum under his tray. What a nasty kid. George stared at the gum on George's hand. George, she said, that is so great. Great? You mean gross? George cried. No, great, Nancy said with a smile. Look what color it is. I bet you it was blue gum. Chapter 8. 551. Alright, Chapter 8 is called Party Crashers. It's blue, George said slowly. The gum stretched between her fingers as she spread them apart. Just like the blue gum we found on your barnyard buddy, Nancy said. The girls decided not to save the icky gum as evidence, but they did decide to question Henderson after his karate class. There's only one karate school in River Heights, Nancy said. Let's go to our headquarters and look up the address. After I wash my hand, George said. She winkled her nose at the gum at least 3 times. Back at the Drew house, the girls raced up to the headquarters. As George sat down at the computer, she noticed Nancy's scrapbook on the desk. Hey, it's your Valentine's, George said as she flipped through the pages. She stopped to stare at one page. Nancy, check it out. Nancy looked to see where George was pointing. On the page was a Valentine with a red heart and a smaller pink heart flat. It looks just like the creepy Valentine you got, Nancy said. She picked up the flap and read the signature. It says, Happy Valentine's Day, your friend, Marcy Rubin. The girls compared the nice Valentine to Nancy's scrapbook to the mean one. The cards were a perfect match. So were the handwritings. Marcy wrote me that creepy Valentine, George cried. Why would she do that? Didn't you once spill grape juice on Marcy's arts and crafts project? Nancy asked. Marcy didn't mind, George insisted. She ran out of purple paint. I don't get it, Nancy sighed, but it sure looks like Marcy wrote the creepy Valentine. Why didn't you notice Marcy's Valentines when you stuck it to your scrapbook, Nancy? George wanted to know. Nancy remembered the afternoon she was scrapbooking. It was the same afternoon she found out about Bess's party. I must have been thinking about something else, Nancy admitted. You do get distracted sometimes, George joked. Let's find Marcy and ask her a bunch of questions. Can't, Nancy said. She's at Bess's party now and we're not invited. What are we going to do? George asked. There's her little scrapbook. Her eyes darted around the room as she thought. Finally she smiled and said, Bess loves my mom's veggie lasagna. There's always a humongous pan of it in our basement freezer. Maybe Bess will let us be a part of her party if we bring her some. Nancy nodded. George's mom ran her own catering company. She cooked all the food and delivered it too. Go for it, Nancy said. George quickly phoned her mom. In less than an hour, Miss Fane pulled up in her catering van. Nancy and George climbed in the back seat next to a jumbo defrosted pan of lasagna. What if Bess doesn't let us in? Nancy asked. Then I hope you like lasagna, George answered. Miss Fane drove the van to the Marvin house. She waited in the van while the girls rang the doorbell. After a few seconds, Bess's voice called through the door. If you came for my party, you're too late, she said. It's just ending. Nancy stepped closer to the door. George has a giant pan of her mom's veggie lasagna for you, Bess, she said, with extra cheese. And it's extra heavy, George called, so open the door. The door flew wide open. Bess was standing in the door frame. Behind her were a bunch of girls from her party. What a brat. She's not a very good friend right now. Nancy saw Kendra Jackson, Andrea Wu, Trina, and Nadine. Where was Marcy? Tell your mom thanks, Beth said with a small smile. She took the pan and was about to close the door when George stepped forward. Wait, Beth, George said. We have to to Marcy." Suddenly, Marcy squeezed through the crowd of the girls. On her head was a gold cardboard crown. Across her chest was a sash made out of red paper hearts. "That's Queen Marcy," Marcy declared, raising both arms. "Marcy Reuben, Queen of the Valentines." Nancy narrowed her eyes at Marcy. How could she be such a show-off after the horrible thing she did to George? "Okay, Queen Marcy," Nancy said. "We know what you did." Marcy blinked hard. What do you mean?" she asked. "In other words," George said, folding her arms across her chest, "we know what you wrote." Marcy paled as all eyes turned to her. After a few moments of awkward silence, she groaned under her breath. "My little sister must have opened her big mouth," Marcy cried. "I did it, okay? I did it." Chapter 9, we're starting in 11 minutes. Okay, Chapter 9, Switcher Moo. Nancy leaned closer to George. "Was that just a confession?" she whispered from the corner of her mouth. "Sounds like one to me," George whispered from the corner of hers. "What did you write, Marcy?" Bess asked. Marcy's eyes began to well with tears. "You know all those Valentines I got on Valentine's Day?" she asked. Everyone nodded their heads. "I wrote them myself," Marcy cried. "Huh?" Nancy and George said at the same time. "I wanted everyone to think I was popular," Marcy explained. She pointed to the gold crown on her head. "And it worked, see?" Nancy's head felt like it was spinning. It was a confession, but not the one she was expecting from Marcy. "Did you also give this to George?" Nancy asked. She pulled the creepy Valentine out of her pocket and read it out loud. There she is confessing. "Roses are red, violets are blue, feet are stinky, and so are you." Giggles and gasps. "I did write that," Marcy said, scrunching her eyebrows, "but it wasn't for George, it was for Henderson." "Why Henderson?" George asked. "He gave me one of those creepy Valentines in school that day," Marcy explained, "so I wrote him one too." "When did you give it to him?" Nancy asked. "At Barnyard Buddy's," Marcy said. "When he wasn't looking, I stuck it in his cow's pocket. I didn't sign it because I wanted him to wonder who it was from. You know, psych him out." "So you didn't write that creepy card to me, George?" Bess asked, smiling at her cousin. "I knew it all the time." "Yeah, right," George said. "I'm sorry I blamed you," Bess said. "Can we be friends again?" "You bet we can," George declared. Bess shoved the lasagna pan into Nancy's hand and gave her cousin a hug. Nancy was cartwheel happy. Her best friends were best friends again. But still, she didn't get it. How did George end up with Henderson's cow? Suddenly, Trina's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Wait a minute, you guys," Trina said. "Marcy tricked us." There they are, hugging it out. "That was dumb, Marcy," Andrea said. "You already have lots of friends." "Yeah," Nadine said. "Us." "So what's the big deal about being popular?" Andrea asked. Marcy shrugged. "I guess it was kind of dumb," she said. "I'm sorry." "We're over it," Kendra said. "Come on, you guys, let's get our goodie bags from Miss Marvin." The girls turned and headed back into the house. Marcy looked at Bess and asked, "Can I still wear the crown?" "You already got cupcake frosting on it," Bess said, "so yeah, sure." "Cool," Marcy said as she began to follow the others. Bess stayed behind at the door. "I really miss the Clue Crew," Bess told Nancy and George. "Can I come back?" "For sure," Nancy said. "We still have to find out how George got Henderson's cow." "And the card that was meant for him, not me," George asked. Nancy remembered Henderson's cow at Barnyard Buddy's. Then she remembered something else. "George, didn't you and Henderson both make baseball cows?" Nancy asked. "And weren't they exactly the same?" "That's it," George said with a smile. "The cows were probably switched." But then George's smile turned into a frown. "What's the matter?" Bess asked. If Henderson has my cow," George said, "then he's probably got my prize ticket too." "You got a prize ticket?" Bess asked. "We'll explain everything later, Bess," Nancy said. "First, we have to find Henderson." "Okay," Bess said. "Let me just say goodbye to everybody, and I'm on it." "You mean it?" George asked excitedly. "Totally," Bess said. "This is a job for the Clue Crew, ×3. "High five!" George cheered. Bess and George high-fived. But when they turned to high-five Nancy, she was still holding the pan of lasagna. Can we give this to your mother, please?" Nancy said. "It's kind of heavy." After saying goodbye to her guests and getting permission from her mom, Bess joined the girls in Miss Fay's van. "Where to now?" Miss Fay sighed. "The Murphy house, please," Nancy said. "I know where that is," Miss Fay said as she started the engine. "I once catered Henderson's birthday party." "You mean Henderson has friends?" Bess cried. "Too weird," George said. When they reached the Murphy house, the girls raced up to the front door. After they rang the doorbell a few times, Mr. Murphy opened the door, the coffee cup in his hand and a picture of a whale with a picture of a whale on it and the words, "Whale of a Dad." "Hello," Nancy said. "Is Henderson home?" "Sorry, girls," Mr. Murphy said. "He just went over to Barnyard Buddies." "Why?" George asked. "Because he's one lucky guy," Mr. Murphy boomed. "He went to pick up his prize." Oh, no. Chapter 10 and the last chapter is at 16:33. All right, Chapter 10, BFF. "I was afraid of that," George groaned. "Let's go there right now," Nancy said. The girls turned away from Mr. Murphy and began running toward the van. Nancy looked over her shoulder and called, "Thank you, Mr. Murphy." "Don't mention it," Mr. Murphy called back. "I didn't know Henderson was so popular with the girls." "Ew," Bess cried. "Come on," Nancy said. "We can't let Henderson get George's prize." The girls hopped into Miss Fay's van. "Where to now?" Miss Fay sighed. "To Farmer Fran's Barnyard Buddies," George said, "and step on it. Please." River Street was only 5 minutes away, but to Nancy, Bess, and George, it felt like hours. The minute Miss Fay parked the van, the girls hopped out and charged into Barnyard Buddies. "Do you see him?" Bess asked as they made their way through the store. Nancy heard a loud pop. She turned and saw Henderson, his face covered with blue bubble gum. Under his arm was a stuffed baseball cow. "That's my cow, Henderson," George said. "You switched our stuffed animals on Valentine's Day." Henderson scraped the gum off his face and stuck it back in his mouth. "I didn't switch any cows," he nodded at the cow under his arm. "This one's mine, fair and square." He snapped the gum and added, "Now, if you ladies will excuse me, I have to collect my most excellent prize." Nancy's eyes burned with anger as she watched Henderson walk to the back of the store. "Great," Nancy said. "How are we going to prove that his cow is really George's?" Bess tapped her chin thoughtfully. Then she grinned and said, "Watch this." Nancy and Henderson followed Bess over to Henderson. "Now what?" Henderson said. "George's cow had a missing button on his uniform," Bess said. Henderson glanced down and gulped. One of the buttons on his cow's jersey was missing. "See," George said. "That is my cow." "Why did you switch them, Henderson?" Nancy demanded. Henderson groaned under his breath, then said, "I got bubble gum on my cow and couldn't get it off. George's cow was exactly the same, so when you guys left the table, I made the switcheroo." "So if the cow is mine," George said, "the winning ticket in his pocket is mine too." "Nuh-uh," Henderson said, shaking his head. "Finders keepers, losers weepers." "That's what you think," George said. She reached for the cow, but Henderson held it high in the air. George swatted the cow out of his hand. It flew a few feet through the air before landing on the floor. The girls were about to run for it when, "Here it is," a cheery voice said. Everyone whirled around. Farmer Fran was standing behind them with another stuffed cow in her hands. This one was wearing a glittering tiara and a long ruffled dress. "What is that?" Henderson asked. "Her name is Melissa." This is the new cow. Farmer Fran said, "And she's your prize." Henderson froze as Farmer Fran handed him the cow. "This is for a girl," he complained. "The prize ticket in your cow's pocket was pink," Farmer Fran said, "and we usually give pink tickets to the girls." Farmer Fran tilted her head as she studied Henderson. "But you're not a girl, are you?" "Son," she said. "No way," Henderson said. "It's a mistake." Nancy stepped forward. She was about to tell Farmer Fran that it wasn't a mistake when Tanya walked over. "The prize ticket was for a girl, Fran," Tanya said. She pointed to George. "That girl over there." George folded her arms. She stuck her chin out at Henderson. "You can have it," Henderson snapped. "I hate princesses." Henderson tossed Melissa into George's arms. Then he pushed his way out of the store. "Ooh-wee," Farmer Fran muttered. "That boy is crankier than a heifer with a hot foot." She waved her hand at Tanya. "Come on, Tanya," she said. "Let's unpack those boxes of stuffed chickens. It's about time we got some chickens at Barnyard Buddies." As Tanya followed Fran, she looked over her shoulder. "Congratulations," she said to George. "Thanks," George said. Then she held the princess cow out to Bess. "This is for you. I'm not into princesses either." Bess shook her head. She picked up the baseball cow still laying on the floor. "I'd rather have this cow," she said. "The one you made for me on Valentine's Day." Then who's going to get Melissa?" George asked. Nancy gazed at the beautiful princess cow in George's hands. Suddenly an idea flashed into her head. "You guys," Nancy said, "I think I know who would love Melissa more than anything." In a flash, the girls were back in Miss Fay's van. Their next stop was Colette Crawford's house. "This is my last stop, girls," Fran warned as she parked the van next to the cow-shaped mailbox. "Thanks, Mom," George said. "I promise I'll clean my room every day this week. Every week this month." Nancy, Bess, and George climbed out of the van and ran to the Crawfords' front door. Bess giggled when she rang the doorbell. "It really does moo," she said. She opened a crack and Colette peeked out. "Hi, Colette," Nancy said. "You didn't bring that nutty dog with you again, did you?" Colette asked. "Nope," George said, "but we did bring this." "Show her, Nancy," Bess said. Colette gasped as Nancy pulled the princess cow from behind her back. She threw the door open and smiled. "For me?" Colette gasped. Nancy nodded as she handed the princess cow to Colette. "Everybody knows you love cows," she said, "and I still feel bad about your chewed-up slipper." "Wow, thanks so much," Colette said with a smile. "Why don't you guys come inside so we can all play with Melissa?" Here they are giving her the cow. That's such a sweet thing to do. That Nancy knows girls have a good heart. "I have a better idea," Beth said. "Why don't you and Melissa come to my house? I have some yummy veggie lasagna we can all share." "I love veggie lasagna," Colette said. "Let me ask my mom. Then wait for me while I change into my cow print sweater." Colette shut the door. Nancy could hear her running through the house and calling her mom. "Another case solved," Nancy declared. "As the clue crew times 3. Can't say that 3 times fast." "We couldn't have done it without you, Bess," George said. "You're the one who thought of that missing button." "A lucky guess," Bess said. "Do you still want the fairy horse I made you on Valentine's Day?" "Sure," George said. "It'll be the best Valentine's present I ever got." Nancy suddenly felt all warm and fuzzy, even though snowflakes had begun to fall. "Does this mean we're all best friends again?" Nancy asked. George stopped at the cow-shaped mailbox. "Are you kidding?" she said. "We'll be best friends till the cows come home." Nancy giggled. She still didn't know what that meant, but it sure sounded like forever. The end. Did you like it? I liked it. It took an interesting turn of events, didn't it? I didn't know who did it there for a minute. I hope you liked it. I'll see you all next time. Be good, have fun, and be nice to each other. Bye.